Today, we're going to do some practice revision for the child language acquisition question on the English language A-level exam. We're going to work through it, and our focus is going to be on process and accuracy, but not on speed. So my suggestion is, if you work through this video and work through the practice, then go back and do another practice with another past paper question that you then time yourself on to see how well you can keep all those skills you've been working on within that limited time frame. So without further ado, let's jump into the question. The one we'll be using today is a question that focuses on a classroom with a teacher and a number of students. The question reads, read the following text, which is a transcription of a conversation between Katja, Gerhard, Stefan, and Vidya, all age 5, and their teacher at school. When we're going into this, we want to follow a certain set of steps. Steps I'd like to follow are these. First, begin with the age and stage of development of the child or children in the transcript. So we see in this one is age 5, and we can guess that this child or these children are going to be in the post-telegraphic stage, but we need our evidence to back that up. Once we have identified the most likely language acquisition stage, then we need to brainstorm and list out what do we know about that stage and prime ourselves for looking at the transcript. Next, we read the transcript and then we look for the context. Who's doing what and why? And once we have understanding of the context of what's going on in the transcript, then we start looking at individual features. Identify the age, think about what you know for that level of language acquisition. Then what is the context? Who is doing what in the speaking? And then lastly, think about all the individual elements that you can find in the text as you annotate through it. And you can connect those elements as well to the theories that you know. Let's start with what stage of language development these children are in. Well, they're all age 5, so they're probably in the post-telegraphic stage. What do we know about the post-telegraphic stage? Let's brainstorm. We know that at this stage, they have a fairly large lexis. We know that they're able to combine multiple ideas using conjunctions in their speech. We know that they're able to follow more complex and abstract ideas, such as idioms. We know that they're questioning at this stage. They ask a lot of questions. We also know that they're able to follow the thread of a conversation, whereas at younger ages, a lot of the times conversations can feel a bit more random. These kids can sort of follow along and fulfill adjacency pairs, respond to what a speaker is talking about, as well as maintain the thread of conversation. Children in the post-telegraphic stage, we know, can communicate much more fluently than children in most other stages. So they're able to use conjunctions to get across multiple ideas or different ideas in relationship to one another. They're able to use pronounce multisyllabic words. They're able to use contractions. They're able to ask questions. They're able to use the different tenses and create plural endings and possessives. Now, there's probably much more we can list, but let's stop with this. It seems like we have a good idea. As we read through, it's likely that we'll find some things that apply to this language stage, which we didn't list ahead of time. That is perfectly great. That's exactly what we want, but we want to prime our minds for reading through and knowing what to look for. So now the next step is to read through the transcript and to get an idea of the context. Who is doing what in this conversation? Take a minute, pause the video, and read through this transcript, and we'll come back. We notice this is a conversation between a teacher and the teacher's students. So in this case, it's a bit more formal than perhaps maybe like an uncle talking to a young child, because the relationship is different. Our conversation is focused on birthdays, or at least it starts out with being focused on birthdays. We notice that the conversation moves from birthdays to birthday parties, and then from birthday parties to bicycles. Now, the interesting thing here is that the kids usually maintain this thread of conversation on their own. They're interested in the topic, although they don't perfectly keep it tightly focused on the subject at hand, and we have a little bit of fluctuation, as well as each child sort of approaching the issue from their own sort of framework and personal perspective without necessarily fully considering what the other person is talking about. The teacher's role in this tends to be to guide a little bit, but also to correct and to clarify. You'll notice that throughout. And she also speaks with authority, which matches the fact that she is a teacher in this context. The teacher guides the conversation, but usually sort of tends to allow the conversation to flow on its own without having to always have the conversational floor or direct the conversation too heavily. Now that we know who's doing what in the conversation, we have the general context, and we also know what age level we're working with, and so likely what stage of language development, the post telegraphic. Let's go in and look for specific elements as we annotate this text. Take a minute, reread the transcript. You may have already made some annotations on there already. Great. Add to those. Look at specifically what are the children in their language able to accomplish well? What are they still developing in? And then also, how does the teacher interact with the students? And what sort of techniques does the teacher use that's related to the children's language? Okay, one thing that makes this a really great practice paper is that there's just a wealth of stuff going on. Not only do you have a lot of speakers, but you have a lot of text to pull from and a lot of patterns that you can find in the text. So let's take a moment and stop and see what are some things we can notice. So I'll share what I have with you, and you may have things on your list that I don't have on my list. That is fine. You just need enough to write a solid analysis with. The first thing I notice is that Gerhardt and the teacher are the primary speakers, and a lot of the evidence we'll pull will come from them. However, a lot of the things that we see with Gerhardt and his language use is also repeated with the other children's language use. So, first of all, what can our children do? They can use conjunctions like and but. They can use contractions like isn't or brothers. They use multisyllabic words like different and inviting. They fulfill adjacency pairs when a topic is brought up or a question is asked. They respond to it in a way that is relevant. For example, when the teacher asks, "Your birthday's near the holidays, Gerhardt, isn't it?" Yes, in June, just. Okay, so Gerhardt responds directly to the question the teacher asks. The children also show an ability to use possessives, both possessive pronouns, as we see in line 28, where Katja says, well, Anna's coming to my party, as well as possessive nouns, as we see in line 47, where Gerhardt says, my brother's is a. And they're even able to move out of the present tense, multiple times moving into using the future tense, such as she'll be too small and yeah, he is, will be. So now let's look at some things that show their current development, things they're still working on. We noticed a lot of repetition, false starts, and repairing. So for instance, in the very first line, Katja says, Anna's birthday and my my birthday. That repetition of my could have a number of causes. It's likely that the child just needed more time to think. So this may be an example of a non-fluency feature that allows the student time, the young person time to think about what they have to say and then compose their thoughts and their words in order to communicate clearly. We do it all the time as adults as well, but it's more common with children. Some other examples of false starts. We have Gerhardt in line 19 where he says, I already know who I'm inviting to my. So at the very beginning, he replaces I know with I already know. It's a false start, starting back over and correcting his sentence. Later, in line 56, Fidja does a similar thing. She says, I just come down to. So she starts with we, realizes that she meant to say I, restarts over using I. Another interesting thing about Vidya's one line in this transcript is how she demonstrates her development in tense. So she uses the present tense, I just come down to, when she seems like she would like to use the past tense, I just came down. So again, even though the kids are able to, in general, break out of the present tense, they mostly stay in it. They're able to competently hit that future tense, but sometimes they're struggling when it goes to the past tense. If we look at Gerhardt's speech, we'll also notice some non-fluency features. So you may have noticed that in line 14, he says, yes, that buys that time for him to think and process. That is a non-fluency feature. Later in line 19, he says, I already know who I'm inviting. So that sort of may be a non-fluency feature. And it's something that he may be using to buy time when he processes or thinks, and something that just indicates that he's still speaking, even though the words are his sentence or ideas have paused for a minute. Another interesting feature of the children's speech is elision. There are multiple times where the children leave out sounds or sometimes even run words together. Let's take a look at a few examples. Okay, so in line 7, Katya says, but not at the same time. And the that you have to figure out the sounds from the phonetic symbols seems like the child is saying not at the same time, but with removing the t's out of that situation so that we wind up with na the same time. In line 31, Gerhardt says, cause, pause, because. So cause is a shortened version of because. He's left out a large part of the word. And then in line 38, Stefan says, my brother's got a, meaning got a. So he goes back and corrects it. My brother's got a red bike. So that got a, he's using elision and dropping that T sound, got a. Now you may want to tie some theories to what you've noticed in the children's speech. Two useful ones, usually when you're analyzing the child's speech, would be Michael Halliday's functional theory. So looking at how they use language to achieve a goal or a purpose, and Jean Piaget's cognitive development theory. And for that theory, these children fall in the pre-operational stage. And there are elements in their speech that show that, such as their concrete thinking, as well as their tendency toward egocentrism. Now let's take a look at the teacher's speech. So the first thing I noticed was how at the very beginning of the transcript, the teacher interrupts their students as the students are kind of slowly processing through some thoughts or phrasing. In the very third line, after Katya is saying, my birthday, the teacher finishes her sentence for her by saying, won't be long, will they? Okay, and then after that, Gerhardt says, mine as well. And then the teacher jumps right in saying, so we've got 2 birthdays coming up soon, haven't we? In these cases, it doesn't seem like the teacher is being rude so much as prioritizing maintaining a sort of fluent flow of conversation. And she's taking what the children are saying, connecting their ideas, summarizing them, and clarifying them for the children. And this sort of is helping them to keep track of the conversation and compose their thoughts in a way that is relevant and clear. And this fits with her role as the educator in the room and the person of authority. And I think the next most interesting element is also on the first page, where the teacher clarifies and corrects the student. Katya says, but not at the same time. And the teacher says, no, that's not what I said. This exchange demonstrates how the teacher is using caretaker language to prioritize clarity and accuracy in the student's communications and thought. Now, if you want to jump into cognitive development theory, that clarity and communication and clarity and thought are directly intertwined. So if you want to use that theory for this interaction, it would be a great place to put it in. The teacher also uses caretaker language to ask questions, keep the conversation moving, and to show interest in the students. For instance, in line 35, the teacher says, is your brother going to invite some of his friends? And you'll notice that another element of caretaker language is the emphasis that the teacher uses in their speech. A lot of times there's a falling intonation at the end of a sentence. Sometimes there's a rising intonation, as we have at the end of the line 35, to indicate a question. And then emphasis, so these underlined words like his friends, helps clarify the ideas in the communication and put focus on the important elements. I think it's interesting that while the teacher will step in to guide the conversation, ask a question, summarize or correct, the teacher doesn't spend a lot of time monopolizing the conversation and allows the students to jump in and drive the conversation as well, sort of giving them the freedom to develop their language and communication skills. So, when it comes to the caretaker language, what are some theories we can connect? Well, when it comes to caretaker language in general, you have four really good theories. You might discuss B.F. Skinner's behaviorism, you might discuss Noam Chomsky's nativism, you might talk about Jerome Bruner's LAS or language acquisition support system, or you might discuss Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development or scaffolding. Within the text that we have here, there are opportunities to discuss most of these. Now, when it comes to nativism and Noam Chomsky, virtuous errors are the gold standard, and I didn't point any out in the students speaking, so I might leave that one alone. However, scaffolding, I think we have examples of. For example, in lines 9 through 10, Gerhardt says, no, a different time in, and then the teacher jumps in and says, a different time in June. And the teacher is summarizing, clarifying, and extending the thought of the student and sort of showing the student how to clearly formulate all of his thinking and the meaning so he can communicate that across. So this is an example of demonstrating clear thinking and speaking, which could fall under the ZPD, or it could also fall under language acquisition support system. And there's also an opportunity to talk about behaviorism. So for example, early on when the teacher corrects the student and says, no, that's not what I said, you could consider that correction conditioning to make sure that the student prioritizes clarity and, more importantly, accuracy in his thinking and speaking. Okay, we have discussed more than enough observations to make a solid response to a paper. So now it's time to take all those things, put them together, and organize a response. Now, everybody does this slightly differently. The method I like to do is to start with giving context of the situation and the speakers, what they're doing, move into an analysis of the child's speech, connect any theories that might be relevant at that time, and then move into an analysis of caretaker language, where I'll probably connect multiple theories to that. I suggest you now take your notes and attempt to formulate an essay response to the question. And make sure as you do so that you explain yourself clearly. To make your writing clear, it's helpful to follow a process. For example, you might provide an observation at the beginning of your paragraph, followed by evidence from the text, and then some explanation tying that evidence back to your overall point, whether it be the child's stage of language acquisition or the reason why a caretaker is speaking the way he or she is, whatever that greater point happens to be, and then chunk those things into paragraphs. When you move on to a new observation, then start a new paragraph. Again, once you've worked through this process and created a coherent, complete result, then go back and try another past paper question, but this time yourself. See if you can go through the same process at a brisker pace. If you're not quite there yet, fine, try another one. Practice makes perfect.